Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. My name is Richard Betts, and I'm the group publisher at Real Asset Media. For those who don't know us, we run a series of these events, newsletters, a Real Asset Day, magazines, Real Asset Insight, Living Retail, and we also do a lot with TV. And also during the crisis, especially, we've been working hard to bring new initiatives. So all of the events have gone online. And we've also introduced Realcast, which is a kind of weekly roundup of the key themes for real asset markets every Monday, as well as special reports. And you can download all of these. Everything that we produce is available for you, free to download and share from our website. A new initiative coming up as well is on the 17th and 18th of September. We'll be introducing a RealX.global, which will be a new conference program as a way of jumping back into the markets after the summer break, as well as a virtual expo. So that's the things that we'll be doing. The session this afternoon is going to focus on the future of office. We'll be looking at a variety of different topics here. Just trying to pick our way through where we see that developing. What are the trends that are kind of being accelerated in any event? And I suppose what that also then means potentially for the investment side. But what I'll do now is just introduce the panel. Let's start with you, Jake. Just a brief introduction of yourself and where you are within this discussion.
Sure. Well, pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Richard, for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jake Jeffcott, and I'm the Chief Development Officer here at Olivia Business Centre in Gdansk, beautiful sunny Gdansk behind me in northern Poland. Olivia Business Centre is really a very large-scale project, 170,000 now. Probably we've just delivered a new building, so more like 200,000 square metres of office space. But we've really sort of been concentrating on really making a destination location. It means not only office space, but public realm, event spaces, and really sort of bringing, the outside in as much as possible, and sort of really creating a place, which really sort of acts as an ecosystem to join, different communities together, not only working population, but also the local community as well.
Great, thanks very much. Tomáš.
I'm a partner of MiddleCap, which is a real estate developer with offices in London, Berlin, Prague, and Bratislava. And we are focusing mostly on commercial real estate developing projects in the cities of our offices.
Great, thank you. Cees.
Cees van der Spek. I'm working for Edge, formerly OVG Real Estate. Well known by the Building the Edge, one of the first smart offices in Europe, and I think one of the most sustainable in the world at that time, 2015, 2016. We develop offices in Germany, the Netherlands, starting in London right now, and are also based in the US. And mostly we focus on three important topics. Sustainability already is in our DNA. But fortunately, we're also pretty busy with the well-being of people in offices, and in this current time, that's a thing that has all our attention. And of course, everything is covered by technology to make those things happen.
That's great. Thank you, Cees. Jonny, just give a quick introduction of yourself.
My name's Jonny Rosenblatt. I'm co-founder of Spacemade, which is an operational infrastructure partner for landlords to help them deliver flexible space to their customers. I set up Spacemade along with my co-founder, Dan Silverman, because we saw that landlords were increasingly looking to deliver their own flexible space to tenants, but didn't necessarily have the in-house capability. My background has been a decade in the flexible workspace game, having previously founded Headspace Group, which I sold in 2017. And really the objective of Spacemade, which is a relatively newly launched business, is to essentially flip the co-working model around to give landlords the power and wherewithal to deliver space directly to their customers, not relying on third-party operators to take a lease and do it for them. So we're giving landlords full transparency. We're an extension of a landlord's team, and we basically run the whole process from branding to feasibility, technological expertise, right through to the marketing, selling and operating of space for them. We currently have about 100,000 square feet across 3 UK cities, and we're likely to double that footprint by the end of the year.
Right, okay, thanks, Jonny. Jarek.
So I'm Jarek Morawski. I'm responsible for research and strategy at Grosvenor Europe. And Grosvenor Europe is part of Grosvenor, the group that is responsible for continental Europe outside of UK and Ireland. And generally, Grosvenor is, I suppose, one of the biggest fully privately owned real estate companies. We invest, we manage, we develop across the globe. It's probably also 340 years, I think, a bit more than that. We cover pretty much the whole scope of real estate. So we have residential development business in Madrid. We refurbish, reposition offices in Paris, or have a retail-driven mixed-use investment in Sweden. There's also Grosvenor activity, in Americas or Asia. I think, in addition to our obviously commercially oriented business, there's quite a strong focus on the social benefit, on supporting communities, heading in the long term to the places where we are active.
Okay, super. Thanks very much, Jarek. And let's start with you, Jake. I mean, there was a mention there from Jarek about community and those aspects, and that's something that's obviously come through quite strongly, I think, across Europe, the UK, but also globally. That sort of sense of creating a community. I guess, how do you see that in terms of the office side?
Well, I mean, yes, strange times, yes, we live in right now. Yes, I think that's a very well-coined phrase. I mean, we've been doing this project since 2011. And, it was always really our focus to, really sort of find that human touch, more than buildings was, I think, our first sort of catchphrase that we came up with. And since the very sort of outset, we were looking at the future of office, really moving away from the buildings and into more of a sort of a collaboration-driven kind of model. It didn't quite get there, I think, until sort of 2013, 14. So I think we were sort of quite ahead of the game, which gave us an advantage, in speaking to potential tenants and investors. And I think that right now, as we've sort of come through and evolved the project and grown, much bigger and sort of taken more people into the project, we've seen that people really, have sort of captured, themselves here to become more and more sort of community-led and be sort of part of a bigger picture. Of course, it wasn't easy because work is work, and different companies generally compete. And for a landlord to kind of tie all of those people together, wasn't really sort of heard of, back in 2011. So, through the last 11 years, we've just seen that it's become more and more important, and as the role of offices has become, I think, I mean, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about how it's changed, but up until, I would say, sort of in March this year, it was on a very sort of stable, steady growth that the offices were becoming more like bases for collaboration. The fit outs were becoming more residential, more colourful, more exciting. And we've put a lot of energy into sort of creating personal development platforms, sports, different sort of CSR aspects to kind of really enhance that community feeling. And I think it's just gone hand in hand, completely with business, up until we've had to sort of social distance. But even now, we've seen the strength of community. And that's, really one of the aspects that we really force, in all of our activity and in all of the channels that we sort of utilize to make sure that, the office for us it's not only about work, it's really about the social aspect. It's about the development aspect. It's about meeting people, making friends, even finding romance. It's much, much more. We've always been sort of focused on that. So community, I think, even more so now is it's really, really important.
And picking up on that trend, Cees, I mean, you were obviously at the forefront of some of the kind of high-tech sustainability aspects in, and looking towards the future of office at that stage. It'd be interesting just to get your take on, I suppose, has the crisis acted like it has in others as an accelerator in this area? Is it kind of making you push the boundaries a little bit more in terms of what you're thinking of doing? Because obviously a development cycle can be, 3 years.
Yeah, development cycle is between 3 and 5 years. And we are, let's call it in crisis since, February, March.
Yeah.
It's 3 to 4 months, which is only, in that sense, a small period and a short period. I think if we look back in the last 4 months, it's hard to say where we are going to, especially when you're in development. But listening to Jake and hearing his story about communities, we have in most of our buildings that we do also those kind of communities. And what we feel is that a lot of people miss those communities at the moment. We started already 6 weeks ago here. So we are back in the office, and we are in a relatively small building. We have 12,000 square meters, where we are one of the larger tenants, but we have 80 companies in our building in the Edge Olympic in Amsterdam. And what we see is that, what I hear, that a big part of the community is not already back, and they miss the other part of the community. And half a building with people instead of the 100% that we had, and the events that we had, because it's also built around events, which is of course not only work, exactly what Jake said, but more than that, is that we miss something. And that's the first thing that we notice. Going back to work is not yet even started. And already to think about the future of work is a difficult one. And I will underline it by the following. We did our first event yesterday. Since the 1st of July, we are allowed to do events with max 100 people, but still with 1.5 meter of distance. And so we could have 45 people in a space, and the rest of the people, 100 people, they were online. And there was a selective group, exclusive group, with mostly corporate real estate managers. And there were, for instance, from one big corporate, there were 3 people, and they saw each other after 4 months for the first time. They have never met each other before, only by MS Teams or by something else. And they missed everything. And I did a research yesterday by all the corporates which were there, and to say, what are you going to do the next months if you look to your space, your square meters, and what everything. And they don't know yet, because they get squeezed today by their CFO. You have to drop down the square meters. We have to get away with some lease contracts because we are going to work with less people in the building, so we don't need all the square meters. As a developer, we think, hey, what's going on? Are we going to develop the same square meters that we had in pipeline, or are we have to negotiate everything? So what I notice mostly at the tenant side is that they just put it a little bit over the summer. They see what others are going to do, rethink it over, boards are coming together. Nobody knows it yet what they're going to do. The small companies, they know, like us, we have 100 people and everybody is coming back to the office. They work home a bit, but we were already flexible. But those companies with 3, 4, 5,000 people, they have no clue. They are first, safety is a big thing. And then they're going to think about, how are we going to redesign my office? The funny thing, we have redesigned our office in a few weeks, because everything is filled with technology. We could easily change it, and in a few weeks we were back to normal. But that's for larger companies so much more difficult. So as a developer, honestly, I do not know yet. I know that everything, but really everything, is going to change. And that's not only square meters, but it's absolutely the way we are going to work, and we're going to work together. So I believe in more community building. So the flex office component, although you see the WeWorks and the hotels having some issues, flex office space will be anyway the future. But I think that the offices will be changed. I think the big corporates are going to request much more flex space, but in a different way that we offer it today. And we do not now have the answer yet. We talk to people, nobody knows it yet, but we're in the middle of rethinking and redesigning and talking. And it still takes a few months, Richard, to know what we are going to do. But it's going to change for sure, and everybody knows that. But in this capital intensive market, it's not an easy thing yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to pick up as well. If anybody didn't see the PropTech event, and no reason why you should have done, but if anybody didn't see that, there's a very good 10-minute introductory presentation from Anthony Slumbers that you can access from the website, and I'll try and put the link to in the chat. But essentially there, he's really saying that sustainability is going to be a key driver for this, wellness, health, and that as well as being a big disruptor for where we are at the moment, that it's a massive opportunity for those that really do then take forward the decision to make the changes that are needed. Cees, you mentioned their flexibility, and Jonny, it would be rude not to go immediately to you in terms of that. What's your sense? I mean, you were saying in your introduction there that you've been looking at this space for a long time. I suppose, how have you seen that develop? Is this an accelerator for that business? And what are the trends that may lead us to learn a little bit more about, I guess, where office is going to be, as Cees says, as we move through this process?
I think fundamentally there has been a structural shift in the way kind of office space is used and actually kind of consumed. And I think it does become a consumer product, which I think is really what's changed. We've seen flexible space grow over the last decade from probably about 1.5% market share to, depending on what report you read, 5 to 6%. The predictions pre-pandemic were it would go somewhere between 20 and 30% of office share in major cities. I think actually that this pandemic might accelerate that. I think there's a bit of a misnomer about what flexible space is, first and foremost, and most assume it's either sort of a your classic old school serviced office with a corridor full of doors, or it's some sort of open plan workspace full of bean bags and slides and free beer. Sometimes it is, but it's not always. I think what's starting to happen is there's this convergence between the traditional leasing market, where everyone has been very used to taking 5-10-year leases and collecting full rent checks a year and saying, bye-bye to the asset for that time being. And the flexible space. Lots of businesses now have grown up in that flexible environment and sort of demand the next phase as they grow into a, what we might term a corporate or an enterprise business. They demand more flexibility. They don't really want to have to worry about, what does my cleaning contract look like, and how do I kind of fit out my space, and how do I navigate the world of design and build, because actually that's not what businesses are here to do. And I think this is starting to happen now across the board. Traditionally, what you've always had is landlords letting space on a 10-year lease to a co-working operator, and the co-working operator plays that sort of rent arbitrage game, and they try and make that margin over and above sort of the fixed costs that they have. As there's been a sort of this kind of land grab over the last couple of years, and operators have taken leases at the very top of the market, it's very well publicised what the impact of that is, and we've seen it initially through obviously the WeWork failed IPO, but as someone already mentioned, the issues that Notel are facing, and all sorts of other operators. And actually what's really starting to happen is, landlords are saying, well, I need to deliver this sort of space. Fundamentally, this is what a tenant desires, and I need to deliver this flexibility, but actually I don't know how to. I don't really have the infrastructure and the setup to do that. So that there's this sort of, we're at this precipice, I think, where flexible space is a necessity for the market, but a lot of people don't quite know how to get there. I guess, from talking up my own book a little bit, that's where we come in and we help landlords. But on a wider scale, there is a demand here, and there is a shift in the way people want to consume space. And I think we're really at this kind of, this pandemic has accelerated this demand. It might be that flexible operators take a bit of a haircut over the next 12 months. But I think the demand is increasingly accelerated now, and we need to be delivering flexible space across different markets. I think now there's a lot of talk about, hub and spoke models and things like this. Actually, how does that manifest in an existing real estate landscape? Well, actually, you need to be flexible. You need to be delivering an array of different products for tenants who want to consume it. Really, I think this is sort of the Netflix moment for real estate, and those that don't really embrace it are going to look like Blockbuster. I think that's the reality of this situation now. So I think it's a really interesting time. But I think the demand for flexible space is only going to increase. It's just, what does that flexible space look like, and how does that manifest? I think we're all learning at the moment, and we're all sort of developing concepts. But the landscape for real estate across major cities across Europe is changing categorically.
Well, that's interesting. I'm just going to launch a quick poll here now, which is what will happen to demand for office space given the increased home working? And your options are: it'll go up, it'll stay the same but change, or it'll go down. Interesting to see what the views are. And there's another question that came in on the chat, which maybe I'll pick up with you, Tomáš, and then also anybody else can pick this up as well. But thanks very much for this, Ian. With all the uncertainty regarding offices today, what do you factor in to design today to future-proof offices for the coming time? Is it location, flexibility, good building? What are the things that you think, Tomáš, and I'll come to you as well on that, Jarek. What are the things that you think are going to help make offices, I suppose, more resilient in terms of design, location, Tomáš?
I would come back to the flexible office, what that means in reality, because when we are talking about flexible offices, it's not necessary about the floor plan or about the fit out of the office. Mostly what we are talking about are the lease terms, because that's what the tenants are looking for. They don't want to sign up for 15 years or 20 years leases. So when we are talking about flexible office, mostly we are talking about the lease contract and the flexibility which is provided within the lease contract to the tenant. And this leads to the problem on the investment valuation at the end, because 15 years contract was providing some kind of security of income for the investors, and this is disappearing. So there must be also shift on the investment side of the market, where the banks and the general investors will accept these flexible leases for the proper valuation of the real estate. Because today on a short leases you get significant discount on the value, which is not in favor of future development. Then when we are when I'm coming back to the buildings resilience in the changing environment and post-corona environment, I think it started even before with the concept of sustainability and of course well-being, which became a big topic 2-3 years ago already. And of course there is the technology which is in the building, the hardware which is getting more and more efficient, more flexible. Then there is the technological backbone of the building, which needs to provide the flexibility of the new technologies coming, and they should be included in the building as they are coming. And then what we are trying to do in our projects, we have some strong push within MiddleCap for natural elements. Like we are trying to have in each of our building openable windows, which looks so basic, but it's not normal. And so we have openable windows which works with the MEP equipment, so it's switching off automatically. We are designing all our buildings so that you have natural light in the staircases and toilets, which you don't find in most of the buildings. And I think these features are helping to make the building more safe, and it's pushing the people for using the staircases and using also the secondary parts of the building. And this is our long-term plan, how we want to future-proof the buildings.
Okay, good. I'm going to come to you in a second, Jarek, but I just wanted to share the results of that. What will happen to demand for office space given the increased home working? 7% was it will go up. 61% was it'll stay the same but change, which is interesting. And 33% it'll go down. That I think is quite interesting, Jarek, because there's been a whole, there was a lot of discussion about the retail apocalypse. There's also then been discussions about the office apocalypse, and that this is going to completely rewrite everything. You're an investor, you're looking at research and strategy. How do you see those things? And also maybe pick up that point as well from Ian in the chat, which was around, what makes it more resilient, what makes it more investable from your point of view? And I suppose, has that changed?
Yeah, well, I suppose, in the first place, when we're sort of in this COVID reality, it's very easy to confuse short-term effects with long-term trends, and that's something that might be happening in some of the discussions. We're seeing this dramatic impact of the lockdowns, especially fortunately, over across most of Europe now, but nevertheless, that really put much of the economy on hold. So I think economic activity was down 20-25% in April, May, which is unprecedented, and that's in the first place a massive economic impact on all kinds of businesses. Some sectors were hit more than others, but generally, I suppose every business will come to feel it at some point. And that's naturally, much of the services use offices. That's something we'll see on the office sector. So that's one reality we're facing. There will be, and is probably already happening, it will take time until we have full visibility of the scale. There will be impact on office space demand simply due to business cycle reasons. So that's one effect. And then the other effect that we're seeing, I suppose, a lot of what we discussed today through the lenses of the last couple of weeks and couple of months, where pretty much everyone moved to work from home. Some countries more, some less. But then generally that was the dominant model, and the scale of this shift was so dramatic. First the scale, and then the pace, that it's really difficult to sort of ignore it and say, and it's quite natural to to ask this question: is it going to stay like this? So I think thinking short term, and in the first place, I suppose we need to focus on the short term. There will be impact on the markets. Is that because the office sector is changing as such? Or is it because the economy is in a recession, and this recession, depends what the recovery looks like. There's still a lot of uncertainty about this. We still hope we'll see a V-shaped recovery with quite a strong bounce back later this year. But this will be that's my view. In the next 1 or 2 years, this will be the predominant driver of what is happening. And beyond that, there are the long-term trends, and I'm not entirely sure if this crisis, if COVID, has changed the nature of these trends. Just like with retail, e-commerce was there before COVID. Same with offices. Working from home was an option for, I suppose, big share of office workers. So it's more the question: will the scale of these effects change going forward, long term, and will they come sooner than we thought? I think, as we had these discussions last year, there were already predictions. Flexibility in the office sector, very important for tenants, something on the rise. Generally, leasing contracts shortening. Things like workers-friendly, healthy offices. A lot of initiatives there, and you see not just green certification. You see like the world building certifications on how you could say how nice the building is. How nice is it to work there? So all these trends coming together, I don't think our view on investable offices has changed due to the crisis. It's more that possibly some of these things that we were expecting will be coming sooner than we thought. But at the same time, I think we need to be careful, looking very far ahead, not to lose sight of what is coming and what is happening now, and what is maybe not quite visible in the data yet. It's potentially a recession, deepest recession in 50 years, some say.
I think that's quite interesting, Jarek. I mean, there's a lot of discussion around the short-term implications, but also what those longer-term implications are, just if there's an economic crisis around the office sector, and take-up is also an important thing. I wanted to pick up one thing also with you, Jake, around that idea of, I mean, we had a discussion on retail actually earlier this week, and the view in that was very much that the office sector is going to start experiencing what the retail sector had experienced, which is that in the same way that people could shop from home, it gave them an alternative to going shopping that they did, and in a way the office sector has also discovered that it can work from home. What's your sense of that? Because in the same way that retail has been putting in, restaurants, F&B, really upgrading it to make it more of an experience, is that something that you think is going to be a growing trend in terms of attracting people to an office space, that it becomes almost a destination?
Absolutely. I mean, just to touch on, I think, the comments that were made by Tomáš and Jarek. I think that these trends were already happening. Not to sort of be too sensationalist about what's going on now, because it really is still a bit of a guessing game to what's around the corner, and I think it is sort of more maybe linked towards what's coming in the economy, as Jarek quite rightly put. But I think that, I mean, there's always going to be a place for office, and I think as well as even in the retail sector, there is a place for retail. I mean, that's why you've seen assets, shopping centres, that have been repositioning themselves as more entertainment. With cinemas and bowling alleys and go-karting and libraries and everything else. People do need to get out, and people do need to get together. And whereas the office, as I said, previously in my comments, it was always really about that. I think sort of social aspect of working together, and I think that's always going to be very, very relevant. We've been sort of predicting that more people were going to be, working from home and, using the internet. And quite frankly, we were quite surprised that it took so long to really get to where it is today. We've installed here, for the likes of Amazon and other, IT companies here. I mean, we have a lot of our IT companies, telepresence rooms. Were they used? Well, not really, not very much, until very, very recently. And, there was never really a take-up of the usage of the technology that was out there until very, very recently. So it was always something that we wondered, when that was going to happen. And I think that this, the current climate is just sort of pushed that, where it should be. Let's say, if people can travel less, if people can, take less flights and things like that, then it is of benefit. But just looking at the poll, it will change, and I completely agree with that. It's all about, I think, what the revolution is right now is based on the social distancing, and how do you get around that? Just in a public space. I think the offices, have to. Well, we've heard, they have to be twice the size, or the personal designation of 10 square meters, as we work on here, will have to go up to 20. So it means that companies will need more space for less people. It's really quite a dynamic, situation. But I think it really does come mostly about what's now, social distancing, and how landlords can, implement, safety measures. To sort of keep people apart until they're actually in their own space. That's where the trick comes right now. But really, it was something that was always going to happen. And I think that, you need to have a central hub. I think that the head office, you have to have a brand. You have to create brand loyalty, with the employees. A lot of people that I know, we live, on the beach. It's great, right? To work remotely from wherever you are. But you can only work so long in your pajamas, and then you've got to put a pair of shoes on, and get to work. So, and people want to do that. So it's a very, very dynamic situation. And as a developer here, as a landlord, we can only try as best we can to provide, the right safety measures, and to sort of try and find the best, of the situation, and utilize that technology that we've got, just like, the guys at the edge, and to try and sort of, make the buildings resilient, future-proof, and all of those things. But I'm very, very upbeat. I'm really quite upbeat that, office will prevail. There is so much of it out there, and it's been the way that things have been done for, literally hundreds of years. So I think, if the solution to this problem is around the corner, i.e. a vaccine where people can actually be confident in being closer to one another once again, I think that we'll see, gradually trends and traditions and habits, old habits will, come back, I think, quite quickly.
I just wanted to point out that the greatest discovery in offices in last decade was the Google type of offices, where it was promoting interaction, promoting meeting people, being closer. And in the last 4 months, the life haven't changed that much. Like to create value, which is the main purpose of working, it's happening through the interaction between the people. So the safety will be important element, but the creativity and the interaction will be still key to creating value.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And thanks, Andreas Trump. I noticed as well, Andreas, thanks for posting this in the chat. The office is anything but dead. Face-to-face office collaboration facilitates knowledge spillovers, learning and mentoring, improves creativity and enhances productivity. The office is also a hub for social interaction. Would you agree? Well, I can't possibly say whether I agree or not, because I'm supposed to be an even hand in it. But yes, I do. Let's just pick up a couple of things. I wanted to just do a quick poll here, which is also which locations will be most resilient or provide the best opportunity. And it's a multiple choice on this one: prime office CBD, secondary cities, or suburban. and I wanted to pick that up because although there's been less about this in Europe, certainly when I've been looking at the feeds that I get in terms of LinkedIn and various others from the US, then we're seeing a lot of focus, a lot of discussion around, because of home working, office spaces moving back into suburban areas, into secondary cities, just so that people don't need to commute as much, so that in a sense you go to the people rather than bring the people to you. And it would be interesting to see whether anybody else has been seeing that. Jonny, what's your sense of that?
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting shift happening now. I think what happened in March was everyone shut their offices, and it was surprisingly easy to get people out of the office. I think what's going to be trickier is getting everyone back in the office. I think the reality is that, and I'm not here to make any predictions, the one thing I'm pretty confident about is that we will not have a situation going forward where 100% of the workforce are in the office 5 days a week. I think actually what's happened with working from home is that I know that it was, I know Jarek mentioned before that it was always available, right? But actually, I think it tended to be slightly frowned upon. I think there's always, in a lot of companies, there's a culture of presenteeism. But I think actually now, with everyone from, top down to in a business has been working from home, everyone's realized it's doable and it's achievable. And actually, if you focus properly, you can work remotely. We actually just launched as a business, as one of our spaces, we launched it only last week, a space in a really nice kind of London neighborhood called Queen's Park. Really beautiful space that actually has been, the uptake's been fascinating. We've seen a very quick shift from a lot of people locally who have been working from home, who are stuck at home, who are sharing a kitchen table with wives, husbands, flatmates, they've got kids running around, actually desperate to get out. And I think what the thing that probably unites a lot of those people is that they don't want to be commuting. And listen, that will change. That will change over time as we get closer to a slightly more of a sense of normality. But I got to tell you personally, I don't want to get on the tube 5 days a week anymore. That's really not something I'm interested in doing. But I think what people are starting to say is, well, you know what, I'm going to work locally, and these are employees of big firms, a mixture of corporates and enterprise firms and some smaller firms as well. But they are moving here because they want somewhere they can access. They want the collaboration point. They want to be surrounded by like-minded people, and they want to feel like there's a separation between home and work. And our uptake has been staggeringly good, actually. Possibly slightly contrary to some of our other spaces that are central London focused, which is taking more time to launch and to ramp up again. But this space has been a really interesting case study for us. I happened to read a survey this morning which actually said that 70% of people are desperate to go to the office because the key thing they want to do is collaborate. But at the same time, the best thing, according to 79% of people, I have the stat written in front of me, is that the best thing about working locally is not having the commute. So you sort of have to compute both of these things, right? These are key drivers, both of them. And I think there's this sort of sense that you need to deliver flexibility across spaces, not just an individual building. I know earlier, Tomáš, you mentioned flexibility is about flexibility of lease length, and that's certainly a part of it. But I think there's a lot more to it. I think there's flexibility of access of spaces. There's booking systems. There's different types of spaces they can use. There's different periods where you can use a desk, an office, a meeting room. There's so much more to it, and a lot of that revolves around operational infrastructure. And you have to have that in place. And if you can then sort of start to build that across a network of spaces in a city or a country or frankly, across Europe, actually that becomes really, really compelling from small businesses right up to corporate occupiers, because you're delivering this kind of flexible offering. You're giving someone, London or Paris or Berlin as a campus for them to use space as they want to use it. And I think really that does become the shift. You'll see people working more locally a few days a week. You'll see people coming into central hubs on a much reduced time frame, but equally it'll be much more intensive and much more proactive, because teams will get together and they will collaborate, in a really strong way, a day, 2 days a week. And then actually people will separate and they'll disperse a little bit and work in smaller groups. And I think that seems to be the way in which sort of people are wanting to work. And from an office perspective, that doesn't mean the office is dead. I think the office is potentially even more important than ever. I just think that these assets and office buildings need to be repurposed and repositioned in order to accommodate those changes.
Okay, interesting. I'm just going to share the results of that poll with everybody. So which locations will be most resilient or provide the best opportunity? We're actually still heavily in favour of prime office CBD, interesting. Then secondary cities at 24%. Sorry, for those listening on dialing into this via phone, prime office was 74%, secondary cities 24%, and suburban 21%. Interesting, but clearly a big preference there for prime office CBD still, I think. I mean, the question also coming in on the Q&A here from Kate, which picks up that point, Jonny, in a way, which is about isn't commuting going to be deemed a wasteful, energy-intensive activity going forward? Kate, in terms of that side of it, do you think that we'll potentially see more kind of smaller satellite offices? And I know there was a discussion around this with Will and Spek a number of years ago, but do you see this becoming more of a catalyst for change in some ways?
We make mostly offices in larger cities, and then it's concerning Berlin, Hamburg, London, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, the larger cities. It depends, I think, a bit on how good your public transport is and how dense the city is. And what we see is, if you like, and I think that what Jonny just said regarding we don't like to commute anymore, but we like to collaborate. Is that collaboration cannot be done if you have 7 hubs and 1 small headquarters, because then still you are online to each other. And what we notice, especially in the Netherlands, is that people are going to work closer to their offices. And we have the luck in Amsterdam that we take the bike. 80% of our people take a bike to come to the office. And what we saw, and I wanted to raise that example due to all the discussions that we have today, is we already back 6 weeks in the office. And due to the fact that we had the fear that somebody had the virus last week, we had to close down the office again, only for 3 days to see the period and to be safe and to check if it was really true. To go back again after 6 weeks that you were back in the office was almost impossible for anybody. Everybody was staying at home again. And then they finally understood how it is to collaborate and be together in an office. And there we learned that working from home is fine, but what most people are doing and what most surveys are also saying is that we like to stay at home 1.5 days a week, maybe 2 days a week, but spread over the week. So what most people do and what we already did, and I think a lot of companies already started with, is that you go after 10 o'clock, you go to your office, you take a car, you take a train or whatever, and you work on different hours of that day in the office. And that are the collaboration hours, and the concentration hours are at the sides of the day or at different parts of the day. And we notice that people still like to be together at that headquarters and like to commute, not 1.5 hours. I think that's so far too much. That's also silly. Don't do that. That's bad for your productivity. But if you have half an hour, 45 minutes, then it's fine. And we have noticed, and we also have checked, we did our own surveys also, is that collaboration, being together, and somebody said in the chat the office is not dead. I fully believe that. And that's why also the survey that you just did, that the CBDs are still 75% attractive to anyway the participants of this meeting, tells me already a bit that going back all to that same spot is still very important. And what I see lately, I think I've talked to 100 corporates the last 4 months, because they all have the same question. Are we going back in hubs? So on railway stations, on the smaller hubs? Yes, apart, but still everybody wants to have the connection with the headquarters. And the headquarters are going to change. We see already big companies today, they're going away from the CBD, but they stay in the city, and they make a campus where they can offer people complete different workplaces. And that's not workplaces in big towers, because that's a problem today. But you want to have green, you want to have outside spaces, you want to have larger spaces where you can sit with bigger groups together. So what we see is that the office is going to change. We did 8 seminars, webinars for the future of office. And what we learned is that will be the big change, that people want to work in a different way. Can you do that in all those hubs? Partly yes, but partly not. And what we're currently trying to do is we are building a big building in Amsterdam. It's called Valley. Take a look if you have time. Valley in Amsterdam, and that's apartments, about 200, with a lot of outside space, office space, restaurants, and retail and museum. And what we are currently thinking is to also add a part of, call it a lounge workspace. So it's not a WeWork, it's not a Spaces. It's part of the building, which is for the people who live in that building, where they can work, where they can have their coffee, so they don't stay at home. They come already in a larger space where people work, where people interact, where people meet, and after a while they go to the office. So you create something extra. You can think about co-living. You have a general or a general space where everybody meets, but you will see that will be, in my imagination, more the hubs, which are closer to your living space, but still you want to go back to the office at the other parts of the day. And in that way, we are going to, I think what Jonny just said, that he had a lot of acceptance of the hub that he opened in that part of London. Yes, that you are going to see, but that will be closer to your living space than it will be only an office space. And I think that there, one way or the other, the home and the office are going to collide and are going to do something together. And no idea how we're going to do that, but you see already the collective in London where you have co-living, where you can work a bit, but still you go to your headquarters later on the day or later on in the week. And that combination, we believe, is going to gain a part of the market. But how? We don't know yet, but there is going to change. There's something that you want to have something closer to your home. That's for sure.
Okay, good. And Jarek, just want to pick something up here from Goncalo in the Q&A, which is: do you think that flexible office spaces can be an interesting asset class? Will corporates look for flexible spaces rather than invest in large corporate spaces? And what about this idea we've been talking about suburban small spaces directed towards those who work from home but want it to be kind of an office space? I mean, do you see in a way that perhaps the office space may well be, I suppose, there may be more opportunities in different areas, rather like logistics used to be one big shed, and now there's then logistics and e-commerce, and there's smaller units, bigger units. Do you think there'll be more of that kind of thing, Jarek? What's your sense of that? And will investors take that on board, particularly institutional investors?
Absolutely. I suppose there's a number of trends, and you sense it from the discussion here. Number of trends that that go in slightly different directions. There's one thing is about commuting. We don't want to commute. Well, we never wanted to commute. I don't think COVID changed that a lot. I don't know anyone who would enjoy spending an hour on the train, on the tube every morning. So that's one trend that is happening. The other trend is about the social interaction. You want to meet people. You don't want to be stuck alone in your kitchen or your bedroom all day. So that's another one. The third one is productivity and collaboration. That's probably the same, iterations of the same thing. People need to meet physically, because only, as nice as it is to see someone on video, it's full collaboration, full exchange of thought and ideas is happening physically. So that's a couple of trends, and I suppose there's, depending on what your focus is, depending on your business, on your company, there will be different solutions. And what we may see is really opportunities, some changes in all sectors, and opportunity in all sectors. And I suppose there's a case for CBD offices, simply because if you all need to meet, and that's why, you can argue why there are CBDs, but it's really mostly, in most cities, it's the place where it's most convenient to commute to for everyone. If you're one side of the city, it's closer for some, but really far away for the others, right? So it's because we don't coordinate where we live within the company. That makes CBDs very easy to manage. So there's certainly, even if you commute less, maybe if you decide to work from home some days, that means you can accept a longer commute on other days, right? So even easier to do that. And then there's a case for suburban offices for the reasons that Jonny, Jake has already mentioned, that you don't want to move far, but then you don't want to be stuck at home. What's your choice? It's your sort of local scheme that offers work, and it's really hard to guess which one will win. But I suppose, in the balance, it feels like that strong CBD focus of the previous years and decades might be softened. It has been softening already before, right? It's not that important to have a specific address, right? To be on the Castellana in Madrid, maybe, or on certain streets. It's more the convenience and the quality of office that was winning in the previous years already, and that's an ongoing trend. I don't think that will change. So that might shift the balance slightly away from CBDs to suburban offices, but would be far from saying that one model is the clear winner and the rest is losers. That's not such a clear-cut trend.
Okay, good. I wanted to just pick up on one thing in terms of locations, just very briefly. Maybe Tomáš and Jake on this, which is across Europe. Obviously, there's been differences. The Czech Republic, for example, has seen very few issues in terms of the health crisis. Poland also, similarly, much less issues than some of Western Europe. Do you think that means that there will, because there was already an office movement towards Eastern Europe, what's your sense of that? Do you think that will also be accelerated, that move towards, for some office areas specifically to be, moving towards Eastern Europe?
I would help my answer with Jarek's comment about the short-term impacts of the COVID and the long-term impacts. And the long-term, it's more about the availability of the workforce, and that's why there was move towards Eastern Europe. But I don't think that the companies will react like in panic and start to move to Eastern Europe because of less cases of COVID. I think the companies are generally thinking strategically, and there are much stronger arguments for deciding for the office locations rather than COVID, because I believe this situation is crisis which will be overcome in, let's say, 6 months, and the companies are thinking more strategically.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I think that's right, Tomáš. I mean, we've certainly seen quite an uptick, in interest in Gdansk primarily. I mean, it's not CBD, it's not capital city Warsaw, but I mean, I don't want to sort of put my salesman sort of marketing hat on here. But again, I think when we look at non-CBD locations like outside the capital, the wellness aspect, is really sort of starting to, hit home, quality of life, that kind of thing. And I think that the availability of workforce, it moves, and it follows the money. Which is something which I don't really think we've touched on. People still work for money, and people still work for wages, and the companies, with the big brands that can afford those offices pay the best. And that's why you commute. Now, I think that Jonny touched on it very, very sort of aptly when he said that it's more of a social acceptance thing, that it's actually become more social, sort of corporately acceptable that people actually work from home right now. And that's sort of like been a sort of a driver for comfort, but still, people have to pay those bills. And when we say that we had an uptick, in interest, for Gdansk especially, it was really because of the resilience, I think, of COVID. There was some sort of immediate effects because actually, the productivity and the operational sort of continuity of a lot of companies here just carried straight on. And that sort of like put a lot of highlight on Central Eastern Europe as a destination, whereas America was closing down, UK was closing down, India, Malaysia, those places were sort of just going offline. For some reason, luckily, we were not so affected, and that sort of did put a sort of a spotlight, certainly on us. And there has been, it's quite a tangible sort of mark, in more inquiries as to Poland. It's not the cheapest location. You've certainly got the skill now. You've got a lot of foreign companies which have set up successful bases here. Blah 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 blah. But there is something in it. It might be short lived, though those inquiries might not result in deals down the road. But certainly, our location selection people here were like getting a lot more inquiries.
Okay, good. I'm aware that we've slightly overrun our time, so I'm just going to do one last round of questions for everybody, which is to try and draw this down a bit, I guess, into what all of this means in terms of investment markets, locations, those kinds of things. So where would you, based on all of these, what sort of office would you invest in, and where, I guess, would be, so where do we think people will want to be in offices, and what are the resilient areas? Let's start with you, Jonny. What type of office and where?
I think UK is my focus rather than the rest of Europe, so I'm going to hone in on UK a little bit. I think London and the sort of core cities remain very attractive. I think rather than possibly location, I'm not trying to dart around the question, but I think rather than location, I think the key really is acquiring assets that can be, I suppose, formulated in a different way. I don't think this is about buying an asset and taking a bond-like yield out of it as a once you let it to an array of kind of a multi-let building. But I think actually you need to find a way where you find an attractive asset that can be, I suppose, reformatted, slightly repurposed, and operated in a way that that is answering the questions of today's market. And so I think that can be across CBDs. I think also there are potentially opportunities in good suburban locations. And I think as long as you can fundamentally sort of shift the manner in which those buildings are operated and delivered to tenants, then I think there's seismic opportunities right now. This is the thing that I keep thinking is this sort of famous old advice, which is don't waste the crisis.
Okay, good. Tomáš.
Like MiddleCap long term is focusing on the CBDs in the key European cities. So we are currently, I'm now on the call from Berlin. We are looking at the site here. We are continuing the transaction for purchase of of like very central site in Berlin. In London, we are also in the CBD, like in the city. And we are looking at one location in Budapest, which is also the office location of Budapest. So I think we are consistent in the strategy, looking for the key location, key central location of the capital cities in Europe.
Okay, good, Jake.
Well, we've certainly put our money where our mouth is, in what we've done here, and I wouldn't change that. I think that, core can exist in secondary cities. I'm not so driven and drawn towards capitals. I think that like I said, there's been a general sort of expansion outside of capitals to secondary cities. So that's always been our focus here. Certainly would be going forward. Scale is something which I think we would have to play with. We've gone pretty big here, but that's kind of enabled us to have more room to move when it's come to things like social distancing and people being safe, because we've got the scale and the room to create sort of safe havens, for people to move easily through the project. So, look into the future. If we look at, pandemic ready, resilient buildings of the future, I think there's something to be said still about, having a big floor plate, and sort of like big distances, big sort of gaps between buildings, campuses, that kind of thing. But definitely, keeping it as much as you can local, and maybe sort of, mixing different functionalities, like Cees was saying, yes, about residential being sort of in the mix, a bit more closer to the office, that kind of thing. So it's sort of mixing it up a little bit.
Okay, great, Cees.
For us, I think, for me, but also for us, I think you have to anyway stay close to public transport. Although today it's maybe not that easy, I think it remains very essential. But what for us is extremely important is that a building, an office place, a workplace, or whatever, could be extremely fast, adapt itself to the current circumstances. We learned that from here, and we just made a video of our current office, how we changed that and how we easily could change it because it's full with the right technology, but also extremely focused on sustainability. I believe that if I see the EU, and let's talk about Europe, and see the Green Deal, which is coming, in 5 to 10 years, we don't work anymore in an office which is not, fully focused on people and their well-being. And that has to be sustainable and full with technology, because otherwise the new generation of people, and I think an office is made for people, is not going to work there anymore. They just don't go anymore. So it should be attractive, adaptive, and extremely focused on people and their well-being. And if you, one way or the other, can make that flexible, and if you look to the edges that we make, 20 to 25% of all our buildings have flex office, because all the big corporates want to have more flex office. And I think what Jonny said, it's absolutely true, is although you see it a little bit, maybe that's a little bit questioned now, in the future, everybody wants to have more flexibility in his lease contracts, and not anymore those 10 or 15 years. Maybe for 50% of your office space, for the other 50%, you want to be adaptive to what's going on in the world. And I think there is where we focus on, and that will not change. Good space, good location, the right space where you really, and I use the word fun, where it's fun to work, together. I think that still has the future, for sure.
Great. Jarek, last words for you.
Right. So it's not easy to pick one specific type. I suppose what sounded from the panel, flexibility generally in the way of adapting to an uncertain future is important. So I would probably echo Jake's point on floor plates. Large floor plates just gives you more options how to design the workspaces. and I suppose something that got a bit in the background recent weeks and months is sustainability. That will come back, and that's a very important factor. So generally, I suppose quality of the building, of the space, goes before location to me. That's important, as long as the location is reasonable, of course. So there needs to be some good level of accessibility. CBD versus suburban, I suppose there's a problem with CBD is pricing simply, and I don't really have a feeling that it has changed in the recent months. It is very expensive for what you get. Otherwise, that's the main really obstacle in investing in very central locations. Going very suburban, you at least in the short term, you are facing risk of vacancy and loss of income. I suppose there's a lot more supply. The supply is easier to deliver. So generally, suburban locations, far suburban locations, are difficult. So probably something in between, like good city locations, not necessarily very central, but well located, good, well connected, and really good buildings in the first place.
Thanks very much to everybody for your views. Thank you for your questions, for the views on the chat. And Andreas, I think there was also one from you. Yes, that's it. Locations with good transport links are here to stay. Those buildings that are efficient, sustainable, accessible, and offer strong amenities are likely to perform better relative to others. So, in fact, that's the last words to you, Andreas. Thanks very much for joining us. The next session that we've got is on the 15th of July. That's focused on student housing. Then there's a break over the summer while we are developing and building RealX.global, and that will have a full program on the 17th and 18th, which we'll be announcing fairly shortly. So do watch out for that, and we'll keep you all updated on that. In the meantime, thanks very much to all of the speakers for your input. Really interesting discussion. Thank you to everybody for joining us. Stay safe, stay well, and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you, everybody.